Ever planted a grapevine only to watch it struggle for years without producing a single cluster? Maybe it grew like crazy but never fruited. Or worse, it died back that first winter and you had no idea why. Growing grapes can feel intimidating, but here is the truth. Once you understand the basics and follow the right steps, grapevines are actually one of the most rewarding and long-lived plants you can add to your property. In this video, I am going to walk you through the complete process of growing grapes from start to finish, covering everything from choosing the right variety to harvesting your first clusters. Plus, stick around to the end, where I will show you a simple pruning technique that most backyard growers get wrong, and fixing it can double your harvest. Let us get into it. Grapevines are one of those plants that, once established, can produce fruit for decades. I have seen vines that are 50, 60, even 100 years old still cranking out beautiful clusters. And the good news is you do not need a vineyard or a fancy setup to grow them. A single vine trained along a fence or over an arbor can give you 20 to 30 pounds of grapes each season. So whether you want fresh eating grapes, juice, jelly, or even wine, this process will work for you. Let us start by talking about how to choose the right variety. Now, before you even think about putting a vine in the ground, you need to pick a variety that is actually going to thrive where you live. This is probably the most important decision you will make, and honestly, it is where a lot of people go wrong right out of the gate. They see a beautiful grape at the nursery, bring it home, and then wonder why it never does well. So let me break this down for you. First, you need to know your USDA hardiness zone. Grape varieties have very different cold tolerances. If you are in zones 3 through 5, you are going to want to look at cold-hardy varieties like Marquette, Frontenac, or Concord. These can handle temperatures down to -30 or even -40 degrees Fahrenheit. If you are in zones 6 through 8, you have a lot more options. You can grow European varieties like Chardonnay or Cabernet if you want to try your hand at wine grapes, or table grapes like Tom Cord or Jupiter. And if you are in zones 9 or 10, you will want heat-tolerant muscadine varieties, which are actually native to the American South and thrive in hot, humid conditions. The second thing to consider is what you want to use the grapes for. Table grapes for fresh eating are bred to have thin skins, a nice crunch, and usually seedless. Concord-type grapes are perfect for juice and jelly. And wine grapes, well, those are a whole different category with specific flavor profiles. Do not make the mistake of planting a wine grape expecting it to taste great fresh off the vine. Most wine grapes are pretty unpleasant eaten raw because they are high in acid and tannins. I personally grow a mix. I have got some Concords for juice, some Marquette for wine, and a few Neptune vines for fresh eating. That variety has worked really well for me in Zone 5. My advice would be to check with your local extension office or a reputable nursery in your area. They will know exactly which varieties perform best in your specific climate. Once you have your variety picked out, the next step is choosing the right spot and getting your soil ready. And I cannot stress this enough. Site selection is everything with grapes. Get this wrong, and you will be fighting an uphill battle for years. Grapevines need full sun. I am talking at least 7 to 8 hours of direct sunlight per day during the growing season. If you can give them a south-facing slope, even better. That extra sun exposure and air drainage makes a huge difference, especially if you live somewhere with humid summers. You want air moving through your vines because stagnant, moist air is an invitation for fungal diseases. Speaking of air, avoid planting in low spots where cold air settles. Cold air is heavier than warm air, so it literally pools in valleys and depressions. A late spring frost can wipe out your entire grape crop for the year if your vines are sitting in a frost pocket. I learned this the hard way years ago. I had a vine planted at the bottom of a gentle slope, and 3 years in a row I lost the crop to late frosts in May. Moved another vine about 40 feet uphill, and it has never had a problem. Now let us talk about soil. Grapes are actually pretty adaptable when it comes to soil types, but there is one thing they absolutely cannot tolerate, and that is wet feet. If your soil stays waterlogged, your grapevine will struggle and eventually die. Good drainage is non-negotiable. The ideal soil pH for grapes is between 6.0 and 6.8, so slightly acidic to neutral. Before you plant, I would highly recommend getting a soil test done. Your local extension office can do this for about $15 to $20, and it will tell you exactly what amendments you need. If your soil is too acidic, you can add lime. If it is too alkaline, sulfur will bring it down. As far as soil preparation goes, I like to dig my planting hole about 2 weeks before I actually plant. This gives the soil time to settle. Dig a hole about 12 inches deep and 18 inches wide. If your soil is heavy clay, dig even wider, maybe 2 feet across, and mix in some compost to improve drainage. If you have sandy soil, compost helps there too, because it improves water retention. Compost is really your best friend either way. All right, now we are ready to actually plant. The best time to plant grapevines depends on what form you are buying them in and where you live. If you are buying bare root vines, which is usually the most economical option, you want to plant in early spring while the vine is still dormant. That is typically March or April in most areas, as soon as the ground can be worked. If you are buying potted vines from a nursery, you have a little more flexibility. You can plant those from spring through early summer. When your vine arrives, take a close look at the roots. If you are working with a bare root vine, the roots should be moist and pliable, not dried out or brittle. Before planting, I like to soak the roots in a bucket of water for about 2 to 3 hours. This rehydrates them and gives the vine a good drink before it goes in the ground. Now here is something a lot of people get wrong. They plant their grapevine too deep. You want to plant at the same depth the vine was growing at the nursery. Look for the soil line on the trunk, that slight color change where it transitions from root to stem. That line should be right at or just slightly above your soil surface after planting. Place the vine in your hole. Spread the roots out gently so they are not circling or bunched up, and start backfilling with your native soil. I like to fill about halfway, then give it a good watering to settle the soil and eliminate air pockets. Then finish filling and water again. You should use about a gallon of water at each stage. After planting, I always add a 2 to 3 inch layer of mulch around the base, but keep it a few inches away from the trunk itself. You do not want mulch piled up against the bark because that can cause rot and invite pests. The mulch helps retain moisture and keeps the roots cool during that critical first summer. One more thing about planting. If you are putting in multiple vines, spacing matters. For most backyard setups where you will be training vines on a trellis or fence, 6 to 8 feet between plants works well. If you are doing a more intensive vineyard-style planting with rows, you will want 8 to 10 feet between rows to allow for good air circulation and access. Now let us talk about support, because grapevines are not going to hold themselves up. They are vigorous climbers that need something sturdy to grow on. And honestly, getting your support structure right from the beginning saves you so much headache later. There are a few different approaches depending on your space and goals. The simplest option for a backyard grower is an existing fence. A sturdy wooden or metal fence works great. You can train your vines right along the top rail and let the fruiting canes hang down. I have seen beautiful grapevines running along split-rail fences, chain link, even the side of a garage. If you want something more intentional, an arbor or pergola is a classic choice. This is especially nice if you want to create a shaded sitting area. The vines grow up and over the top, and you get to harvest clusters hanging down above your head. Just make sure whatever structure you build can handle the weight. A mature grapevine loaded with fruit is heavy. I would recommend at least 4 by 4 posts and sturdy crossbeams. For more serious production, a dedicated trellis system is the way to go. The most common backyard trellis is a simple 2-wire system. You set posts about 15 to 20 feet apart, bury them at least 2 feet deep for stability, and run 2 horizontal wires between them. The bottom wire goes at about 3 feet off the ground, and the top wire at about 5 to 6 feet. This gives you room to train a main trunk up, then spread your fruiting canes horizontally along the wires. Whatever system you choose, get it in place before or right at planting. Trying to install a trellis around an established vine is awkward and risks damaging the roots. By the way, if you are finding this helpful so far, make sure to subscribe so you do not miss future videos. All right, let us keep going. Now here is where things get really interesting and honestly, where most backyard grape growers get confused. Training and pruning your vine in that first year is crucial for setting up a strong, productive plant for years to come. Get this right, and your vine will reward you. Skip it or do it wrong, and you will end up with a tangled mess that underproduces. In year 1, your only goal is to establish a strong root system and grow one healthy, vigorous shoot that will become your permanent trunk. That is it. You are not trying to get fruit this year. In fact, if your vine produces any flower clusters that first season, pinch them off. I know that feels counterintuitive, but trust me on this. You want all the plant's energy going into roots and that main trunk. When your vine starts growing in spring, you will probably see multiple shoots emerge. Let them grow for the first few weeks so you can see which one is the strongest and most vigorous. Then, and this is the key part, select the single best shoot and remove all the others. I usually do this when the shoots are about 6 to 8 inches long. Pick the one that is growing most vertically, looks the healthiest, and is coming from a good position near the base. Tie that selected shoot loosely to a stake or your trellis wire as it grows. You want to guide it straight up. As it continues growing through the summer, keep tying it every 12 inches or so to keep it vertical. By the end of that first growing season, you should have a single straight trunk anywhere from 3 to 6 feet tall, depending on your growing conditions. Now here is something important. Do not be alarmed if your vine does not grow as much as you expected that first year. Grapevines put a lot of energy into root development initially, which you cannot see. That is actually a good thing. A vine with a strong root system will explode with growth in year 2. I have had vines that barely reached 2 feet the first summer, then shot up 8 feet the following year. So be patient. At the end of that first dormant season, usually late winter before bud break, you are going to do your first real prune. Cut that main trunk back to the height where you want your permanent arms or cordons to develop. For most trellis systems, that is right around your bottom wire, usually about 3 feet off the ground. Yes, you are cutting off most of what the vine grew. It feels brutal, but this is exactly what you want. The vine will respond by pushing out strong lateral shoots right at that cut point, and those become your permanent horizontal arms. All right, let us talk about ongoing care once your vine is established. Years 2 and beyond are where things really start to get exciting because your vine is building the framework that will produce fruit for decades. Watering is one of those areas where people either overdo it or forget about it entirely. Young vines in their first and second year need consistent moisture to establish. I like to give my young vines about an inch of water per week during the growing season if we are not getting rain. A soaker hose or drip irrigation works great for this. Deep, infrequent watering is better than shallow, frequent watering because it encourages roots to grow down rather than staying near the surface. Once your vine is established, usually by year 3, grapes are actually pretty drought tolerant. Mature vines have root systems that can reach 10 to 15 feet deep. I only water my established vines during extended dry spells, and honestly, A little water stress can actually improve fruit quality by concentrating the sugars. Fertilizing grapes is another area where less is often more. Too much nitrogen and you will get tons of leafy growth but very little fruit. In most soils, a single application of a balanced fertilizer like a 10-10-10 in early spring is plenty. I apply about a quarter pound per vine in years 1 and 2, then bump it up to about half a pound for mature vines. Spread it in a circle about 12 to 18 inches from the trunk and water it in. If you notice your leaves turning yellow between the veins, while the veins stay green, that is usually a sign of magnesium deficiency, which is pretty common in grapes. A foliar spray of Epsom salts, about 2 tablespoons per gallon of water, applied when leaves are fully expanded, usually fixes this right up. Annual pruning is absolutely essential for grapes. Unlike a lot of fruit trees where you can get away with minimal pruning, grapevines require significant pruning every single year. Most of your fruit develops on 1-year-old wood, meaning canes that grew the previous summer. If you never prune, you end up with a tangled mess of old wood that produces less and less fruit each year. The best time to prune is late winter while the vine is fully dormant, usually February or March in most zones. You want to prune before the buds start swelling, but after the worst of the winter cold has passed. I will go into more detail on pruning technique in the bonus tip at the end, because this is such an important topic. Now let us talk about some common problems you might run into and how to solve them. Because no matter how well you prepare, nature has a way of throwing us curveballs. The first issue a lot of growers face is poor fruit set. Your vine blooms, but the little grape clusters never develop into full-sized fruit. This is usually caused by one of 3 things. Cold or rainy weather during bloom can prevent pollination. Grapes are mostly self-fertile, but they still need dry conditions for the pollen to transfer properly. Unfortunately, you cannot control weather, but choosing early ripening varieties can help you avoid late spring cold snaps. The second cause is over-vigorous growth, usually from too much nitrogen. The vine puts all its energy into leaves instead of fruit. Cut back on fertilizer the following year. And third, young vines sometimes just are not mature enough to set a heavy crop. If your vine is only 2 or 3 years old and fruit set is light, that is completely normal. The second common problem is powdery mildew. You will notice a white powdery coating on the leaves, and it can spread to the fruit. This fungus thrives in warm, humid conditions with poor air circulation. Prevention is key here. Make sure your vines have good airflow by proper pruning and not letting them get too dense. If you catch it early, sulfur-based fungicides work well. I spray preventatively every 10 to 14 days during humid weather, starting when shoots are about 6 inches long. Neem oil can also help for organic growers. Black rot is another fungal disease that shows up as brown spots on leaves and causes fruit to shrivel into hard, black mummies. Once you see it on the fruit, it is too late to save that cluster. Remove and destroy any infected fruit or leaves immediately. Do not compost them. Clean up all fallen debris at the end of the season, because the fungus overwinters on mummified berries. Fungicide sprays starting at bloom can prevent black rot in subsequent years. Japanese beetles are a major pest in many parts of the country. They skeletonize grape leaves, eating everything except the veins. For a few beetles, hand-picking into soapy water works fine. For heavy infestations, neem oil or spinosad sprays can help. Avoid Japanese beetle traps near your grapes because they actually attract more beetles to the area. Birds are going to be your biggest competitor once your grapes start ripening. They can strip a vine clean in a matter of days. The only reliable solution is netting. Drape bird netting over your vines when the grapes start to change color, which is called veraison. Make sure the netting reaches all the way to the ground or birds will find their way in from below. I use 1/4-inch mesh netting and clothespins to secure it to the trellis wires. All right, the moment we have all been waiting for. Harvesting your grapes. Most grape varieties take 3 to 4 years from planting to produce their first real harvest. Year 1 and 2 are about establishing the vine. Year 3, you might get a small crop. By year 4, you should be getting a full harvest. The exact timing of harvest depends on your variety and your climate, but most grapes ripen somewhere between late August and October. So how do you know when your grapes are ready? Color is the first indicator, but it is not the only one. Grapes change color, called veraison, several weeks before they are actually ripe. The real test is taste. Start sampling your grapes once they look fully colored. They should be sweet and flavorful with no green or sour taste. The seeds inside should be brown, not green. Another test is the stem. When grapes are truly ripe, the stem right where it attaches to the cluster starts to turn brown and woody. If it is still green and pliable, give them more time. I usually harvest by cutting entire clusters with pruning shears, leaving a little bit of stem attached. Handle them gently because grapes bruise easily. Now for that bonus tip I promised you at the beginning. This is about dormant pruning, and it is the single most important skill you can develop as a grape grower. Most backyard growers either skip pruning entirely or they do not prune hard enough, and both approaches dramatically reduce your harvest. Here is what you need to understand. Grapevines are incredibly vigorous. Left unpruned, a single vine can grow 30 feet or more in a single season. But all that growth is counterproductive for fruit production. You want to channel the vine's energy into a limited number of high-quality fruiting canes. The technique I use for most backyard grapes is called cane pruning. In late winter, you are going to select just 2 to 4 of the best canes that grew the previous summer. These should be about pencil thickness, have healthy buds spaced about 3 to 4 inches apart, and be positioned close to the main trunk. Each cane you keep should have about 8 to 12 buds. Here is the part that shocks people. You're going to remove everything else. I mean everything. All the other canes, all the old wood that fruited last year, gone. By the time you are done, your vine should look almost bare. Just the permanent trunk and those 2 to 4 selected canes. It feels extreme, but this is what grapes need. Those selected canes will each produce multiple fruiting shoots, and each shoot can carry 2 to 3 clusters. Do the math, and you are still looking at 30 to 50 clusters from a single vine, which is plenty. The alternative method, called spur pruning, works better for some varieties, especially wine grapes. Instead of keeping long canes, you keep permanent horizontal arms called cordons and prune. Each shoot back to just 2 or 3 buds. These short stubs are called spurs. The principle is the same though. You are limiting the number of buds to concentrate the vine's energy. If you have been letting your vine grow wild for years, do not try to fix it all in one season. Renovation pruning is a multi-year process. The first year, select 1 or 2 of the best canes close to the base to become your new trunk. Remove most of the top growth and start training those new canes vertically. It takes patience, but you can absolutely bring an overgrown vine back into production. So that is everything you need to know about growing grapevines from start to finish. From choosing the right variety for your zone, to preparing your site, planting properly, building a support system, training and pruning through those critical first years, and finally harvesting clusters of sweet, delicious grapes. It is a process that takes a few years of patience, but once your vine is established, it will reward you with fruit for decades to come. If you found this helpful, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you do not miss future videos. And if you have any questions or you have been growing grapes yourself and have tips to share, drop them in the comments below. I love hearing what works in your garden. Thanks for watching, and good luck with your grapevines.